You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we are on indictment watch in Fulton County, Georgia. We have new reporting from the New York Times today. The jury's forewoman said in an interview that the jury recommended indictments of multiple people on a range of charges. She said, quote, "It is not a short list." What can you read from the tea leaves on this one?
Brian, I think maybe we're beyond the reading the tea leaves phase. I think we're all kind of sitting around enjoying a nice hot cup of tea now,
Yeah.
because when the foreperson of the jury, the very, jury that sat and heard the evidence of Donald Trump's Georgia state election crimes, gives an interview and says that we have recommended multiple indictments of multiple people. I mean, she has not identified the people, which she was not permitted to do. But it seems to me it's pretty clear indictments are coming. I will say it was a little unusual to see a juror who sat on a grand jury in a pretty consequential case giving an interview to the media. But I was heartened to see the reporting that Judge McBurney, who had supervisory authority over the Georgia State Grand Jury, told the jurors that they are permitted to give interviews, but he kind of told them the do's and don'ts, what they could talk about and what they couldn't talk about. And based on the reporting, it looks like she followed the judge's instructions. But, some of what she said was really pretty blockbuster. Not only that the grand jury is recommending that multiple people be indicted, but I think there's also some foreshadowing in what she said about who might be indicted. For example, if you'll remember, when the redacted grand jury report was released last week, the grand jurors said that they believe one or more people lied to the grand jury. And they said, we want to see District Attorney Fani Willis charge those people for their lies. First of all, when somebody lies under oath before a grand jury, it's not only the crime of perjury, lying under oath, that's for openers. It also can form the basis of an indictment for obstructing justice when you lied during the grand jury investigation. It can also give rise to a charge of accessory after the fact, because when you lie, your lie may have the effect of helping the target of the investigation get away with his crimes. And who might be one of those liars? Well, one of the things that Emily Kohrs, the foreperson of the grand jury, said was, I really enjoyed hearing the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson about the inner workings of the White House. People will probably remember Cassidy Hutchinson was that brave young woman who testified before the January 6th House Select Committee. Well, she also testified before the Georgia State Grand Jury. And the forewoman, Ms. Kohrs, said, you know what? Emily Hutchinson was a lot more forthcoming than her former boss, Mark Meadows. So there you go. There's some foreshadowing. It looks like Mark Meadows may very well be one of the liars who the grand jury believes should be indicted for his crimes.
Glenn, is there a world in which, a lot of people get indicted, which was the inference that the forewoman said here, but that the person at the center of all this, who's Donald Trump, somehow doesn't?
I cannot conceive of that world. So, and there are some things that Ms. Kohrs said that really do strongly suggest that Donald Trump is one of the people that they recommended be indicted. Part of what she said was, we paid a lot of attention to the phone call between Donald Trump and former Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in which Donald Trump came right out with his criminal ask, right? Just give me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. Well, after she said that they focused a lot, they spent a lot of time on that phone call, she was asked by the reporter, is Donald Trump one of the people you recommended, the grand jury recommended should be indicted? And she declined to answer that question. But here's what she said. It wasn't all that cryptic. She said, you know what? You're not going to be shocked at who we recommended for indictments. She said, it's not rocket science. Well, you know what, Brian? The only thing that would shock me is if the Georgia grand jury did not recommend Donald Trump be indicted. So I think it's pretty clear that in the not too distant future, we are going to see for the first time in American history, a former president indicted for the crime of trying to overturn a presidential election's results.
Okay, so with that said, the special grand jury report is in. At this point, what is District Attorney Fani Willis doing now, and how long should we expect her to have this report until she makes a decision on whether to indict?
Yeah, I think this is where we need to go back to the tea leaves, because we don't know exactly the timing of, when we might see indictments. But here is what's happening based on this unusual Georgia state system where you have two grand juries. You have a special grand jury that is empowered to subpoena witnesses, compel difficult witnesses, combative witnesses to testify. But that grand jury can't vote to indict people. It can only issue a report and make recommendations regarding who to indict. Then the district attorney has to go back to the regular grand jury, because that's the grand jury with the power to indict. So I strongly suspect Fani Willis is back before the regular grand jury right now, presenting the findings and recommendations of the special grand jury and asking the grand jury to consider indicting the people that the special grand jury recommended be indicted. So how long might that take? Well, we know that District Attorney Willis said previously, about 3 to 4 weeks ago now, that her charging decisions are imminent. Some people will say, well, imminent is already in the rearview mirror, isn't it? You know what? Let's let District Attorney Willis do the work she needs to do to get this right, to be thorough, to be careful, because she is about to be the first prosecutor in our nation's history to indict a former president who committed crimes against the United States, crimes designed to keep him in power unlawfully and unconstitutionally. And I have to say, Brian, if she does that, and it sure looks like she will go down in the history books as a brave, strong, determined, pro-democracy prosecutor. And frankly, I'm a little disappointed at my former professional home, the Department of Justice, because Donald Trump's crimes are federal crimes. He's a federal problem, and it calls for a federal solution. That looks like a federal indictment. But you know what? All the 110,000 employees at the Department of Justice, for whatever reason, have dragged their feet. And Fani Willis said, you know what? Not on my watch. You committed crimes in the state of Georgia. I'm going to do what's necessary to hold you accountable. And I think history will look on Fani Willis really fondly.
That's perfectly put. Just as a quick aside here, are we going to know whether the grand jury proceedings are moving forward, or is that all done in secret?
Grand jury proceedings are always done in secret. So the next thing that we will hear is that the regular grand jury has returned indictments against, whoever they choose to indict. And then there will be an arraignment date set. An arraignment is the very first court appearance after a defendant has been indicted. And here is my fear, and frankly, my hunch, is once Donald Trump learns that he's been indicted and his first court date is set in Atlanta, in Georgia, I fear we're going to see a post on his third-rate social media platform that says something like, "Come to Atlanta for my arraignment will be wild." Let's hope it doesn't go the way of January 6th.
Yeah. On that note, let's finish off with this. I know we've spoken about this before, but I think it bears repeating here. If Donald Trump is indicted in Georgia, what defense does he have? What can he rely on here as some last vestige, as some last effort to try and save himself?
He has no viable defense. He has no straight-faced defense. A jury will not be fooled by Donald Trump claiming, for example, this is probably the only thing he could claim, well, I really thought that there was 11,780 votes worth of fraud in Georgia. But you know what? You need some evidence to back up that belief. If you're going to offer that to a jury, you darn well better have some proof to bring to the table at your criminal trial. And let's finish with this, because remember, the special grand jury made a point of putting in their report, we unanimously find there was no fraud undermining the results of the election in Georgia. So that blows out of the water any claim Donald Trump could try to offer to a jury that I really thought there was fraud. That's why I was asking for the exact number of votes I needed to win. Yeah, you know what? In Georgia, that dog won't hunt.
What's pretty amazing is we got very little information released from that special grand jury report, but it is amazing that the little that we did get released from that report basically just undermine his entire defense in that case. I mean, like, for all that, for the only thing for them to release was basically them to say that there was absolutely no widespread fraud in this election, and thereby undermine him being able to go forward and say, oh, well, the whole predicate for me trying to get Brad Raffensperger to add these votes was because there was fraud, and so we had to do what we had to do. But that's already just had its legs kicked out from underneath it. And so pretty amazing that was one of the pieces that was actually released in that grand jury report, that special grand jury report.
And remember, this grand jury is just made up of ordinary citizens in Georgia, and they came together. They listened to 75 witnesses over the course of many months, and they took it as a point of pride to author their own report. And, the grand jury, which is a system that a lot of people kind of mock and deride and say they'll indict a ham sandwich. Let me tell you, in my 30 years, that was not my experience. The grand jury, sitting as the conscience of the community, wants their evidence to meet the standard involved in indicting somebody, that is probable cause. This grand jury served as a check on any claim that there was some kind of prosecutorial overreach or abuse, or it was a witch hunt. These citizens came together, sat as the conscience of the community, and said, the evidence supports indictments, and here is who should be indicted. That is the kind of system that I think we can be proud of.
Yeah, and you kind of forget it sometimes because we're faced with all this propaganda from the right-wing media ecosystem, from Donald Trump himself, and Fox News, and all these other Republican senators and Congress people who are just groveling at his feet. But when you have regular people who have evidence in front of them, people who aren't interested in politics, there was a lot to read about this forewoman in these reports, in these op-eds from the New York Times and whatnot. And these people don't pay attention to politics like everybody else does. This is just what happens when you have normal people who see the evidence, and it draws them to these conclusions that the rest of us can see are obvious when they're not hampered, when they're not completely colored by all the partisan bullshit surrounding it. So with that said, there's obviously going to be a lot more to talk about on this specific case in Fulton County, Georgia. To keep up with all of this stuff as we continue to watch and as we continue to wait for indictments to come down, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.